Welcome to DETV. My name is Negin, and today with me in this program we have John Arendsen, the CEO of Crest Backyard Homes, who's with us to talk about ADU. But before we jump into that, John, I would like you to tell us a little bit about your background. You've been spending a lot of time in construction and the pre-construction environment.
I've been at it about 35 years. I've been a general and a manufactured home contractor since 1986 and 87. I then got my, in 1997, I got my manufactured home dealer's license. And in 2007, I got my real estate broker's license. And I've been actively engaged in land development, manufactured housing specifically, just about every aspect of land development construction you can think of, with an emphasis on manufactured homes. And I'd say in the last 10 years or so, we've been involved heavily with the ADU business, or accessory dwelling unit industry.
You spend a lot of time, as you've mentioned, more than 30 years. Throughout this time, what are the trends you've seen?
Boy, I've seen in California specifically, I can go clear back to the 60s on that. With manufactured housing became a huge trend in the mid to late 60s when they started developing all the thousands of manufactured home parks all over the United States, but particularly in California. Some of the various manufacturers bought large chunks of land and then developed those into mobile home parks, and then would station their manufactured homes out in front of these parks and open up a sales office and start selling people manufactured homes and allowing them to place them inside their parks. And that's where people would live out their lives, more or less. That became a new wave. That was a whole new industry unto itself. Another industry that became interested after, 20, 30 years into the, I'd say, early 80s, the new trend came from taking these rental parks, or some of them even trailer parks, and converting those into resident-owned condominium or subdivision developments, which allowed folks to have the opportunity to own their own real estate. Rents were starting to get crazy. The whole idea behind a mobile home park was retirement for folks. The greatest generation, our generation that preceded the baby boomers, the World War II basically generation, wanted to have an inexpensive way to live out their lives. So that's when these mobile home parks became popular. And then after that, the landlord started abusing that privilege by jacking the rents up on them to the point where it was no longer practical to use that as a retirement home. So the homeowner associations and the various parks band together and basically went to an attorney and arranged to make an offer to buy their land. So they created these homeowners associations, and then voila, you have resident-owned manufacturing facilities, and that became real popular in the 80s. And then in the 90s, another trend took place, which we were very active with, called the PUD, which is private urban development, where it was similar, but it was designed that way from the ground up. It wasn't a conversion like an existing park with a bunch of old homes in it that was turned into a condominium development. This was actually a development designed and built from the ground up with specific architectural themes and landscape themes and amenities like clubhouses and golf courses and swimming pools. And they're very nice. And that became the trend of the 90s, but that was utilizing manufactured homes. And now, for the last several years, the ADU thing has taken off, and now manufactured homes are by and large being used for an acceptably low cost entry into an ADU.
So, yeah, exactly. Now we are in the ADU rush, but what is the biggest advantage you see as someone who's seen all of these trends coming and going in ADUs?
The biggest advantage, well, I think the one now is huge. Parks and developments, by and large, are falling out of popularity for a variety of reasons. But specifically, we're finding demographically that our baby boom generation, which is me and my cohorts, are not as apt to want to live in a mobile home park as we are to age in place. That's a huge trend. I've been in my home for 40 years. It's a nice big home. I raised all my kids here. My grandkids love to come and play in our pool, on our zip line, and all the other little amenities that we've built into our property to lure them in to come to visit us. And we have no intentions of leaving here. We have a good sized piece of property, so we plan to add an ADU at some point and either live in it ourselves and allow our kids to use our primary residence if they wish to do so, or may stay in our primary residence and allow, when it comes to that time, a caretaker, healthcare provider to live in an ADU on our property and be close by should the need arise.
So you mentioned some of the advantages of and profits of actual ADU units, but what are the challenges? Because it looks like you're going to be on both ends of the customer at the same time, the builder. What is the biggest challenges as a builder you're facing in ADU?
As a contractor, the biggest challenge is the permit process. Going through that whole series of that whole evolution, if you will, because it is a process, because ADUs are relatively new. A lot of your local jurisdictions just can't wrap their arms around exactly how they want to implement their particular jurisdiction. Even though it's a state mandate, the local jurisdictions, the local cities and counties still have the right to create their own laws and their own rules and regulations as long as they maintain the minimum standards required by the state mandate. And this is where you run into trouble, because in San Diego County, we have the 18 jurisdictions, including the county itself, and trying to get each one of these jurisdictions to harmonize has been a real challenge because they don't. And you never know from one day to the next what new rules and regulations they're going to adopt or embrace. It's almost as like they change their rules and regulations as often as you and I change the sheets on our beds, put it that way. It can happen on a regular basis. So I always tell my clients, don't hold your breath. I'll go down to the permit counter today. They may have a whole new set of rules and regulations that we're going to have to conform with. So that is a huge challenge, and still is today. And I think it's probably going to be one of the biggest challenges for this whole industry moving forward.
For this industry moving forward, what do you expect other than easing the permits? What other things should be done?
That's the big thing. I mean, other than that, it's really not a problem. The only other issues you run into as a developer or a contractor is adding your infrastructure. You have to hook it up to the existing grid, and that can be a challenge. It's not like taking a fresh lot, or we say a fresh pallet. You start from scratch on a lot that's never been developed. You can do your own thing. You can put your utilities where you want to put them. You can bring everything out to where that needs to be brought out in terms of being able to hook them up once you get to the point where that particular trade is ready. An ADU is completely different. I mean, in essence, you're taking a round peg and trying to fit it into a square hole, because you're dealing with a lot that has its own grid work already established. So you're taking this thing and sticking it down on this piece of property. Then you have to bring everything to it. You have to trench and or airdrop, but normally trench all your utilities into that unit from the house. And they're not always in the same area. On a house, unlike a manufactured home, it may have the gas on one side, the water on the other side, the electric panel could be on one side, and the sewer could be in the front. But you have to take all those utilities and figure out how you're going to get that all back to the area where you're going to hook up the home, whether it's a manufactured home, whether it's a site-built home, regardless of the method of construction, that's what you're dealing with. So that's one of the biggest complexities and unknowns of the entire industry. So when you're asking somebody, or when somebody asks you, well, how much is it going to cost? I can give them, with a manufactured home, I can give them a bottom line. I can give them the exact price for the home based on all the upgrades and options and extras and things that they want to add to it. But in terms of getting that home located on that property, that's a whole different story. That has to be studied, that you have to do workups on that. It takes time out on that job site. You may make multiple trips out there. You may be meeting a surveyor out there, a septic company, an engineer or two or three engineers, depending on the dynamics of the development. So there are a lot of unknowns, and we've jumped all over the place with that. We've had projects go from $20,000 on site preparation, site development, as we call it, up to $100,000. And the cost of the home itself is only $75,000. So you can see there, it adds an awful lot to the bottom line. People get all excited when they say, oh, I can get you the home for $75,000 delivered. Oh, when can we get it? Today, or as soon as you get your permit. But we've got to get that site developed first. Oh, well, what's that going to cost? And that's where the whole process begins.
That's quite interesting. But do you see the public knows about the challenges and benefits of ADUs at the moment? Are they educated enough?
Oh, getting educated very quickly. That's probably been the rage of our industry for the last 3 years, since 2017, when the very first ADU legislation was passed in California. It's been like a wind fan fire. And in fact, I don't know if you remember the fix and flip boom that was going on in California after the last turndown. It became the huge new wave of business. People were going in and buying distressed properties or abandoned properties or foreclosed properties, and they were fixing them up and then they were flipping them. They called that the fix and flip industry. That went off like a wind fan fire for several years until they absorbed and dealt with that inventory. Now the same thing's happening with the ADU business. It's becoming a huge, I almost call it a fad. Everybody wants one. Everybody sees the value of it. Everybody sees the opportunity to allow a loved one to age in place in one. The biggest reason, the biggest motivation is the added revenue stream it produces. You're going to be making extra money on it. I'm working with an individual right now who wants to go out to senior citizens. He happens to be in the reverse mortgage business, and I think this is a great idea. He has a product he wants to offer folks who qualify, senior citizens who qualify, an opportunity to realize the value of a reverse mortgage as it applies to adding an ADU on your property. Because right there, a lot of these folks are on fixed incomes. They don't have that discretionary income that they need to do a lot of the things they need or want to do. But this ADU, especially in the San Diego market, can bring them an extra couple of $1,000s a month. That's not a bad little, amount of money to add to your monthly budget, especially when you're getting barely that or less for your Social Security. In some cases, it doubles their income.
So when we are doing this interview, it's the time that California is in lockdown. All around the world, there's this stress about the economic effect of COVID-19 on daily lives and daily industries. For example, housing industry and construction industry needs people to be in places, to build things. Do you think this would have an effect in your industry?
Oh, by all means, it's having a huge effect. It's all but slowed the industry down, brought it to practically a dead stop. We're basically observing all the laws and we're considered an essential industry, so we're allowed to continue with business. The only problems stem from the client, who really doesn't want a bunch of strangers in or around their home. It also comes from our crews, who don't want to be in that stranger's home, not knowing what they may or may not have. So it's kind of a two-way street. So the way we've gotten around that is we practice social distancing by just allowing one trade at a time to go onto a property, and one crew, one trade. And that's based on the homeowner allowing us to do that. In many instances, you've got projects where you don't have any choice. You've got things that are open and susceptible to weather, vandalism, theft, whatever you want to call it. So you've got to get in and, as we call it, button up jobs. You've got to make them safe. You've got to finish certain things that from a safety and a value standpoint need to be done. So we send our crews in, a crew at a time. If there's plumbing work to be done, we send the plumbing crew in. Usually consists of, in an ADU, your plumbing crew never consists of more than 2 people. And the same with your electrical trades. So the really neat advantage about ADUs is you don't need big, huge crews, especially manufacturing. You get by with very few people. So you're not a huge encroachment on people's privacy or safety.
Thank you so much, John Anderson. Thank you so much for the time you gave us and insightful conversation.